Welcome back, everybody, to Do Space's 2024 Sustainability Summit. I'm Michael Sowers, your host. I'm the technology manager for Do Space, and we are now at our penultimate presentation for the afternoon. We're 6 of 7. For those of you who've been have made it this far, congrats! We've got 2 more to go. And our next speaker is Danielle Easdale. She's the director of film and flexible materials recovery at the Recycling Partnership and board president of the Nebraska Recycling Council. Danielle has over 20 years in the recycling and waste management industry with extensive experience spanning many facets of the recycling chain, most recently as part of the executive team at Firstar Fiber, a material recovery facility in Omaha, Nebraska. And we'll say I met Danielle. She gave a presentation on the UNO campus about a year ago. And because of her, Do Space is now doing orange bag recycling, and was literally the first person I thought of when I was trying to put this day together. So, Danielle, welcome. And what have you got to share with us?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Great to be able to join you. And apologies if I have a little bit of background noise. I'm actually traveling and on the road at the moment, trying to solve the plastic crisis in California today. And it has actually just started raining, so I am in my car. And I apologize if I have too much background noise. So just holler at me if I need to talk up or anything like that. But thank you so much for joining. Looking at the attendee list, I know I've met a lot of you in my previous role at Firstar. So some of you may be familiar with some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today, but yeah, we'll get into it. We will if my slides move. There we go. So yeah, I'm Danielle. Thanks for the wonderful introduction, Michael. I've been in the recycling industry now for just over 20 years in various different roles. Most recently at Firstar in Omaha, who's the company that processes all the city of Omaha and the city of Lincoln's recycling, and recycling from around the state as well. I primarily got into sustainability and into recycling because of my love of nature. I grew up in Australia on the coast, and so very at a very young age started to develop an interest in what was happening with the products that we were throwing away. And side note, in my other life, I'm also an artist. So not all waste and recycling, but even my art focuses on conservation. So um, one of the biggest statistics that's always kind of really jumped out at me is when it comes to plastics is they accounted for 35.7 million tons of the municipal solid waste that we generated in the US in 2018. And of that, only 8.7% was recycled. And so really, I wanted to dive into why is that? Why is the recycling rate so low? What are we doing in Nebraska? And some of the challenges that recycling has faced. I know recycling, especially with plastics, can be confusing. So I wanted to leave some time for question and answers today, to see if I could help. But just basically, what are some of those traditional recycling challenges? And the reason that that number is so low is primarily because not all plastics can be recycled by traditional means. And so when you look at a plastic container or what have you, you see that chasing arrows symbol that has the numbers inside it. A common misconception is that that means that that package is recyclable. That's not actually what those arrows mean. Those arrows are what's called a resin identification code, and that's actually to tell the recycler what plastic resin that product is. And so quite often we run into consumer confusion with people thinking that that's recyclable and thinking that that means that they can throw it in the bin. So essentially, when it comes to plastics that are easily recyclable, typically out of all those different numbers, the main ones that you can recycle is number 1, number 2, and number 5. And so they are typically containers. So your pop bottles and things like that, or your deli clamshells, that's a number 1 PET plastic. Your milk jugs and your laundry detergent jugs, they're typically a number 2, HDPE. And then number 5 is polypropylene, which is like your yogurt tubs and your buckets and things like that. Those 3 plastics are actually very easily recycled into new products and can quite often go straight back into what they were in the first place. So they call that bottle to bottle recycling. The other numbers can be problematic. And I'll go into those reasons here. Actually, I'll step back. So PVC, which is number 3, you don't typically see that in a household application very often anymore. It used to be in a lot of toiletry products and bathroom products, shampoo bottles and things like that. You don't see it so much anymore. It's mainly used in plumbing and building applications now, but occasionally you will still see it. That's problematic for recycling, typically because of the fact that it's polyvinyl chloride. So when that's heated up, that releases a chlorine gas, which is extremely toxic. And so that is one of the reasons why that is particularly hard to recycle. Number 4 is LDPE. That can be hard to recycle. That's like a flexible films, like bread bags, your bags that you get from dry cleaners, a lot of those flexible films, shopping bags, things like that, LDPE, they're difficult to handle because of the way that they act when they get into the recycling stream. The resin themselves, it can be recycled, but because of the physical properties of it, it tends to tangle up in the screens at the recycling facilities. And it can also act like paper when it gets to the recycling facility. So that can be a challenge. Number 6 is polystyrene. So if you think of like your foam to go containers, the foam cups that you get at the gas station, things like that. They are traditionally hard to recycle because it's expanded with air. So it's very, very light, and it's very hard to bale and condense. And when a recycler is processing things, they are looking to put stuff into condense it and put it into bales so that they can load it onto the trucks and ship it off to be made into new products. In the case of polystyrene and EPS, essentially it's very, very light, and so you don't get a lot of product onto the truck, so that makes it extremely difficult to deal with. And number 7, my least favorite of all the numbers, that just means other. That could mean absolutely anything. It can mean multiple different types of plastics sandwiched together. It's just a catch-all for everything that doesn't fit into that other number. So really, what makes a plastic hard to recycle? You've got the physical form, like I talked about with the LDPE before. You can see on that little picture there that it's wrapped around the discs and the screens at the facility. It can be a multi-laminate. So you think of something like a chip packet. It's like printed on one side, and then the inside is like that silver foil looking. So multi-laminates can have lots of different layers sandwiched together, even in that really thin, tiny layer. And typically when you're looking to recycle something, you're looking to have one resin, one particular product type. So they're very hard to separate, very hard to recycle. And then, of course, contamination, wishful recycling, things like that all makes the different plastics hard to recycle. In Omaha and Nebraska at large, we're very, very lucky to have Firstar Fiber. They are the largest mechanical recovery facility in Nebraska. They employ 120 people in their facilities in Omaha and Lincoln, and they process about 100,000 tons of material from around the state and even into neighboring states. And they're really something that we as a state should be very, very proud of. They really value sensible and sustainable waste management, and they really believe that waste are resources that are worthy of recovery. So they will go after pulling as much as they possibly can out of the waste stream and keeping it out of our landfills. So the Hefty Renew program that Michael was talking about was a perfect example of this. So Firstar was the first material recovery facility in the whole country to implement this program on a permanent basis. They started back in 2016, and it started with just 6,000 households. And the whole concept of this program was to go after all those hard to recycle plastics. So chip packets, candy wrappers, foam to go containers, and put it into these orange bags, which were easily able to be collected at the front of the recycling process and capture it. Basically, you fill up the bag, you put it in your curbside recycling bin. It gets collected at Firstar, separated, and then they're able to divert it and keep it out of the landfill and send it off to accepted end markets. The whole point with trying to keep these plastics out of the landfill is that we need to demonstrate that all plastics are resources that are worthy of recovery and keeping them in the economic stream. And so keeping them being used, turned into new products, and so that they're not just being landfilled or end up in the environment. And so you probably hear a lot of the time of people talking about things, talking about the circular economy. And that's really moving away from this whole concept of taking something, making it, using it up, and then just throwing it away. That's basically making it, using it, turning it back into a new product, using it again, and keeping that value of that product going round and round and round. And Firstar is a really great example of this with what they're doing. And I'll go into that in a minute. But recycling, it really does have a huge economic impact on Nebraska. In total, I mean, we talked about just Firstar with they have the 120 jobs there, but recycling itself creates and supports 2,218 jobs across the state, and roughly $127 million in wages. And when you have a look at what that generates in revenue and taxes and the total economic impact, it's huge. It's huge. So, definitely a great industry to have in Nebraska and the impact that it has. Now, this is from the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries report from 2021. I believe that they've have recently updated these figures as well. So going back to keeping the plastics that we're capturing in that Hefty Renew bag and other plastics, and Firstar, they're putting their money where their mouth is, and they are looking at that circular economy model, seeing what we can do to keep those hard to recycle plastics out of the landfill in Nebraska. And they have built a facility called a plastic pre-processing facility, or a PERF. And what that's doing is that is taking those hard to recycle plastics, sorting them and blending them and processing them into a wide range of feedstock resins and making these little cubes that you can see in the picture here. And by making these cubes, these are now a more consistent blend of resins, which can actually be used to feed into durable goods and into other recycling applications. So Firstar has built a plastic lumber facility. You may have seen some of that lumber around the city. they sell it to market. You can purchase it. My back stairs are made out of it. It's really nice to see those plastics that we're recycling in Omaha, in Nebraska, can then go back into a product that we can actually purchase ourselves. So here's an example of some of the plastic lumber that's generated from those products made with the Hefty Renew program. My back stairs are made of them. Very, very nice looking product. Yeah, you can contact Firstar if you're interested in any more of that. And the nice thing about this is this creates a value for those plastics that before were just destined to the landfill. They were just thrown away. They had no use. Now they're actually valuable products. And so one of my mentors, Dale Googles, he always had this phrase that I always like to quote, that waste is just resources waiting for alternative, sensible thinking to emerge. So I challenge you all to have a look at what you're using on a daily basis, not to think of things as items to be thrown away, but how can we look at those things alternatively and come up with alternate uses for those? So I wanted to save some time to answer questions because I know that plastics recycling can be kind of confusing, and give everybody a chance to ask any questions that they may have.
Let me get my camera back on here. And my video there. There we go. Excuse me. All right. As a reminder to everybody, we have a Q&A section in Zoom. Please feel free to post your questions in there, and I will pass them along. We have I always have a couple, and then there are several coming through already. So let me start with the folks who have submitted. The first one was quote from Don. So styrofoam is air-filled plastic?
So polystyrene, so when you hear the phrase EPS, that actually stands for expanded polystyrene. So if you think of those foam cups and everything like that, basically there is air that has been injected into that plastic to expand it. So that plastic can densify down. Sometimes you'll see containers that look similar to the deli clamshells that can also be made out of polystyrene, but that isn't expanded. So the white stuff that you see is typically what they call expanded polystyrene, which is filled with air. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. We're learning some chemistry here. Okay. An anonymous person asks, plastic with resin code number 3 are supposed to be recyclable in Omaha according to the city's solid waste program, which labels the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 5 as recyclable. Would you recommend not recycling those number 3 items, or should we listen to the city's guidance and continue putting them in our recycling?
Yeah, absolutely. So it would be unusual. Number 3 isn't really around so much anymore in a household application, unless it was like building products and things like that. They're not very common anymore. Firstar does have markets for those, so you can continue putting it into your recycling as per the city guidance. It's just typically considered in that harder to recycle band. So
not in the orange bag or in the regular. So orange bag or
put
regular?
it in the regular as long as it is a container. If it's not a container, so that's typically an easy ready reckoner a lot of the time if you're unsure. If something is a container, it's likely to be recyclable in your traditional recycling. If it's not a container, then it's probably better in the energy bag, or not at all.
Gotcha.
If in doubt, throw it out.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So actually I'm going to jump around in the questions because that leads to one of the other questions. So how does a recycling plant deal with contamination of recyclable items?
Yeah, contamination is a huge problem for recycling facilities. Essentially, um, the primary job of a recycling facility is to take all those, take all those products that we've put into the recycling bin all together and separate them back out. And that can be by various different means, whether it's like humans sorting it out, it can be technology sorting it out, and technology can range everything from screens to robots to optical solutions, which is quite high tech solutions that shoot air jets at certain, at certain products as it goes across the belt and things like that. So whenever any contamination ends up in the stream, that has to be picked out. So a lot of the times it has to be picked out by a human. So if it's dirty contamination, there's people there that are having to handle that, um, pull it out of screens, all of that sort of things. Or unfortunately, sometimes the contamination does get through. So sometimes that contamination um, will end up in the wrong stream, and that can affect the quality of the recyclables, which then in turn affects the amount of money that the recycling facility can make from that product. And sometimes it will even be rejected and end up in the landfill. But
Okay. I got a couple questions here. I'm looking to see if there's a good order. Um, what is being done to make for more uniformity in plastic resin and easier and therefore easier for recycling? So this is more
Mhm.
at the manufacturer level, I would say, than the.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So that's certainly something that brand companies are having to pay more attention to, and that's only going to increase as time goes on. As I mentioned earlier, I'm currently in California at the moment, as California is bringing in some legislation that's really going to change the way brand companies are looking at their packaging and whether it can be recycled. So there is definitely a lot of interest from brand companies in improving the recyclability, and a lot of organizations that are doing a lot in this space. So organizations like the U.S. Plastics Pact, the Association of Plastic Recyclers, and their design guides for recyclability, and folks like the Recycling Partnership, all looking to work with those brand companies to help increase that. So.
I think that leads good into the next one. There's been a number of discouraging news articles recently about how the petroleum industry knew all along that most plastics were not recyclable and pretended they were to promote adoption. I've also, I personally, I'll interject, have read reports about recycling not getting to the recycling plant and being dealt with in other
Mhm.
ways. The question is written is what percentage of plastic that gets sent to Firstar would you estimate actually gets recycled?
Yeah, so um there's multiple parts to this question, so I'm
Right.
just
Yeah,
trying
there is
to
definitely.
try to figure out which order to answer this in. Um, so I would highly encourage anyone that hasn't been to Firstar, if they get the opportunity to do a tour, to definitely take them up on that and have a look. Firstar's business is all based around recycling. They're not going to take a product that doesn't have a value or that they can't recycle, because essentially you're just making very expensive trash then. Because not only do they have to they have to pay to process it and run it through their facility, but then they then have to pay to landfill anything that isn't actually recyclable. So what goes into Firstar, as long as it is not contaminated, or unusable in terms of it shouldn't have been in the recycling in the first place, does have markets, does get recycled. So they are very transparent in terms of that, and give facility tours all of the time. So Phil, I would contact them if you'd like to see, and I always say seeing is believing when it comes to that.
Mm.
Unfortunately, not everywhere is as lucky as we are in Nebraska with Firstar. And so there have definitely been situations where materials are stockpiled and things like that, or are not necessarily handled in the best way. But in Nebraska, I mean, I can speak to
Sure.
what's going on in Nebraska. We're definitely very blessed when it comes to having Firstar, and they have contracts with a lot of end markets that are taking those products and turning them into new.
Right. So if it doesn't get to Firstar, that's not Firstar's problem. But once they have it, they recycle it. Like,
Correct.
yeah,
Yes.
okay. Yeah. Um,
Yes.
so someone else asked, speaking of contamination, is food considered contamination? Should food wraps be washed?
So yes, food is definitely considered contamination. You want your recyclables uh, clean and dry. Now they don't have to be like absolutely pristine, but if you've got a pop bottle, make sure there's no pop in it. If you've got a yogurt container, make sure you scrape all the yogurt out. Because the thing I think really to remember is you have people that are handling these materials. So if you would put it in your bin and leave it there for a week, if you wouldn't want to touch it after a week, then they're probably not going to want to touch it after a week either. So that's always what I say is a good rule of thumb is, would you want to touch it after a week? Because if not, then yeah, it needs
Very
to be cleaner.
fair. I mean, give
So,
it a good rinse. I mean, basically,
yeah,
you don't need
yeah,
to wash it. It doesn't,
yeah,
but
no,
detergent bottles are the other one. I know you want to make sure those are kind of rinsed out.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be
perfect.
perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, you don't have to sit there and like literally wash your recyclables every night.
Right.
As long as they're empty, as long as they're clean, clean and dry, you're good
Gotcha.
type thing. So yeah.
I mean, I some of these questions I feel like we're picking on Firstar, but I guess they're just our examples. So we'll keep that in mind. But the question is written from Michael: is does the Firstar facility increase or decrease the risk of microplastic release?
Can you expand on I'm not sure I'm understanding the direct, like where this question is coming from, Michael, because Firstar doesn't actually make, well, I mean, they make the new products in terms of the plastic lumber and stuff like that, but most of the recycling is then going to other end markets to be made into new products. So
We'll give Michael a chance to maybe follow up with that in the Q&A if you could. That I will happily pass that along. In the meantime, I was at another recycling event recently where I saw you, and one of the things I learned had to do with how glass is or is not handled here in Nebraska,
okay.
and why we can't necessarily put glass in our recycling. Can you speak to that just to like let other people know?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few reasons why glass is not accepted in the curbside recycling. One of the most obvious ones is that when it goes into the compacting truck, and the truck compacts it and then it drops it on the floor at the recycling facility, the glass breaks up. That then becomes a health and safety issue for the staff that are having to handle the materials. But not only that, those shards of glass can then get embedded into like the cardboard and things like that, and then become a contamination. In addition to the fact that when glass breaks up, it becomes very abrasive. So it's very, very rough on the equipment and machinery at the recycling facility. And so that's why they prefer to have glass collected separately at the drop-off sites. There's still the ability to recycle glass in
Okay.
Omaha, but just take it to the drop-off facilities instead of putting it into the recycling bin at home.
And then, am I correct in understanding that glass is actually all shipped out of state for recycling?
Yes. Yes. So it goes to Ripple Glass out of Kansas City. So
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Okay, Michael has posted a follow-up. He says there was recently a report of recycling centers in other parts of the world where collected plastics were stored on the ground or shedding and deposited into the earth, which ended up leaching into the ground and contaminating water. So I guess is how are they
okay.
handling the incoming materials? Is there a chance that that's releasing plastics, or are they keeping it as clean as possible?
Okay, gotcha. So when the materials get tipped, and I hope this answers your question, Michael. When the materials get tipped at Firstar, they all get tipped into what's called the tipping hole, and that is actually a concrete hard surface. And so it's not direct to ground or anything like that. Also, Firstar has to comply with environmental regulations in terms of making sure that nothing's escaping to, litter isn't blowing around or anything like that that can escape to water and things like that. I don't actually work for Firstar anymore, but I'm sure if you contacted them, they may be able to answer more specifically than that. But I know that the tipping hole is on a concrete surface, so it isn't running to groundwater or anything like that.
They're doing what they can to avoid that problem, from the sounds of it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Another question. What about vapes? There are currently a rise in questions about how to properly dispose of vapes, and is there a way to recycle these?
That's a great question. And I'm going to double that up with lithium batteries,
That
because
was going to be my
they
guess.
yep. Because vapes contain lithium batteries, which are a huge problem for recycling facilities. They're the most common cause of fires within recycling facilities at the moment. So they cannot be disposed of in the recycling, and also shouldn't really be disposed of in the trash. My
Well,
recommendation for people who vape is to speak to your vape store, or wherever you purchase it from, because a lot of them do have take back programs. But it is certainly a big problem, and there is definitely more work needs to be done in how these can be handled and properly disposed of and recycled.
yeah, I'm trying to find the name of it, but for Do Space with all our electronics, there is a place about a mile and a half from my house, Star City, something or other that recycles electronics properly and will take care of the batteries and things like that. So check around. I kind of had an assumption that vapes were going to fall into that category because there is
Mhm.
circuitry and batteries in those things.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
all
think
right.
there's a lot of take back programs that are starting up with the vape. But yeah, definitely room for improvement, but please don't put it in a recycling bin.
Noted. Okay, so I'm gonna we got audience questions cleared out. We've got time. If you've got other questions, please feel free to submit those in. I'm gonna go ask ahead and ask kind of my one question that I've asked all the presenters today, which is kind of like what is the big challenge for you right now? What is vexing you? What is weighing on you as in what you do?
Yeah. So in my job and the world that I live in at the moment, I deal a lot with film and flexible plastics. So I deal a lot with like those chip packets and candy wrappers and those difficult to recycle plastics. And I wish that there was more organizations out there that were making products out of these, because out of these materials. So developing end markets is really what my key focus is on at the moment. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
I would say to anybody listening, if you're thinking of building a deck, give them a call.
reach
Um,
out to Firstar. Yeah.
yeah, it might last longer. Okay, another question. From research I have seen, the national average for recycling is around 32%, but it's only around 14% in Omaha. Does that align with what you've seen? If yes, from your perspective, why is Omaha so far below the national average?
Good question. I thought Omaha was a little higher than that these days, since the rollout of the carts. but yes, recycling is pretty low across the nation. I think a lot of that is changing hearts and minds. We need to make it the done thing. We need to make it easily accessible for everybody, whether you live in an apartment complex or a single family home. We need to make sure that everybody has access to it at work, and we need to make it easier in terms of less confusion. We need to make it so that people know exactly what goes in what bin. If I'm living in Omaha and then I go to Lincoln, make sure that I can recycle the same stuff, that I can recycle in Lincoln just as easy as I can recycle at home in Omaha. So there's a lot of work to be done within the space. I think the city has been doing an amazing job. Their recycling guide that they put together with Keep Omaha Beautiful, if you haven't checked that out, please do. It's a wonderful guide. They have literally gone through every product you could possibly imagine, and given it a listing so that you can tell whether it should go in your recycling or not at all. So they've really done a lot of work in that space. Um, um, Definitely check it out. And yeah, really, it's a case of changing hearts and minds, and making it so it's the done thing. So
All right. Any other questions from the audience? We've hit my questions. I think I've cleared out the list from there. Oh, we got another one from Michael again. Is there a rough estimate of carbon emission reduction related to recycling efforts? Maybe in terms of tons recycled results in X amount of carbon emissions reduced. What's the math? I guess
oh, that varies on each individual product as well. Michael, I can connect you with some data on that. I don't have it to hand right now as I'm traveling and I'm literally sat in my car. But as I can certainly connect with you and point you to where some of that information is available.
Okay. All right. Yeah, he says thank you on that. Okay. Oh, and okay.
I will put my email in the chat for folks.
Okay.
And if anyone wants to reach out to me at all, they're more than welcome to.
Gotcha. That sounds good. Thank you for that. Is there anything else we should all know?
Um, I'm gonna go back to basics, and I'm gonna say, if in doubt, throw it out.
Okay.
Because the more complicated we make it for the recycling facility, the more expensive recycling gets, the harder it is to keep recycling economically sustainable as well as environmentally sustainable. So if in doubt, throw it out.
Yeah, that seems intuitive device on how to do recycling. But I think the term I've heard is aspirational recycling. Like,
Mm-hmm. Well, wish cycling
wish
is kind
cycling.
of,
There's another one. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Well, I think a lot of people think, I'm not sure what to do with this, so I'll throw it in the recycling bin, and they can figure out they can figure out if they can do anything with it. But when you think of it in terms of, the facility is taking 100,000 tons of recycling a year through the door. And if you ever see the facility, those belts are moving fast, and people don't have time to kind of be like, oh, what am I going to do with this? Can I do this? Can I not? The type thing. They're moving fast. If it's not supposed to be there, it's going to get pulled out, and then it's going to go to trash. But you think now the product, instead of just leaving your house and then going to the landfill, now it's left your house, had to be transported to the MRF, has to go through the whole process of the MRF, and then has to get transported again to the landfill. So you've just made very, very expensive trash that's had an environmental impact that's twice as bad, because you've had to transport it twice. It's had to run through all the, all the facility and everything like that. So, and it could potentially end up contaminating good recycling. So if in doubt, you're better off keeping it out.
Okay. To which Ben asks, this is one of those, this is a great question. I don't know if there's an answer. Why is the burden on the consumer when manufacturers are the ones being aspirational?
Yeah. Great, great question, great observation. And I think that is definitely, that dynamic is shifting. And I think we will see that shift even more as extended producer responsibility comes in. And you'll hear a lot more about this as time, as time goes on. Colorado has just become what they call an EPR state, which is extended producer responsibility. And that basically, the real high explanation of that is that it puts the responsibility of the end of life disposal of that packaging back onto the producer that produced it. So that can be through various different ways, through them funding the recycling infrastructure. There's lots of different ways that this is being done depending on the state. So you'll see more and more interest in that. You'll see more and more as that dynamic starts to shift. And then we'll see more things like becoming available. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the how to recycle label on the back of packaging that will say what it is, and it will say carton, and then it will check locally, or cardboard, please recycle, things like that. The recycling partnership, in partnership with Green Blue, has just brought out a new label that's still evolving. It's still getting better, but it's called Recycle Check, and essentially it's a QR code that you can scan on the back of that package, and it will tell you the closest place to you that you can recycle. So it's dynamic. If you're in Omaha, it will tell you can put this in your curbside. You can put this in your curbside recycling. If you're somewhere that doesn't have curbside recycling, it will tell you how to handle that product. So it's just been released. So you'll see it rolling out across more products. I saw it in the supermarket for the first time the other day on silk almond milk carton. So I'm excited to see that roll out, and I think that different initiatives like this, it's not perfect yet because it's still, it's still new, but different initiatives like this are definitely kind of making it easier for the consumer to be able to handle it.
Right. I remember 20 years ago when everybody hated QR codes, and I was like, just give it time. And today they're actually useful 20 years later. Another one came in. Could you shed any light on how recycling facilities deal with things like staples in paper, plastic envelope windows, paper plastic labels on recyclable plastic, etc.? So you've got the plastic, but there's some, or the paper, but you've got something else mixed into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the recycling facility themselves, things like that are fine. You don't have to take the staples out, because when those materials go to the end markets, those end markets are actually built and designed to be able to handle that as part of the process. So like in the case of like staples and things like that, what happens when it gets to the end market is that paper will get pulped up. So it'll get shredded, it'll get added to water, things like that, and turned into a pulp. And then essentially they will separate, the plastic and the film will float to the top or whatever, and they skim it off and things like that. So the end markets are designed to be able to handle that sort of stuff.
So don't worry about that.
So yeah, it's fine.
All right.
Likewise with like like soup cans and things like that, you don't need to take the paper label off, because the process with it at the end, actually that paper gets burnt off in the recycling process.
Gotcha. Okay, great. All right, Danielle, thank you very much. This was very enlightening and kind of most of the rest of our folks are like at org level. This is a little more like what can you do recycling wise and what Firstar is doing. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you from doing it from your mobile office. Um, I'm assuming you're parked.
Yes.
Oh yeah, okay. Just want to make sure it's a little the next level cell phone use while on the road.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And thank you all of us for joining us, especially those of you who've made it this far. We'll be pausing for looks like we'll have about a 15-minute break. I will be running a test with our next speaker, and our last and our final speaker will be starting at the top of the hour at 3 o'clock. Danielle, again, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me. All right. Bye.